Through mist-covered forests and frozen ridges, something vast and deliberate moves unseen, rearranging camps, watching from the trees, and leaving tracks that stop where reason should continue. From a film crew whose lead actress vanished in the northern wilds to a research team that disappeared without a sound, each event points to a presence both intelligent and unseen. In this video, we'll uncover 6 encounters that suggest we are not alone in these woods. In the autumn of 2019, a small independent film crew ventured into the dense forests of the Komi Republic in northern Russia, approximately 150 kilometers northeast of Syktyvkar. The region was known for its vast stretches of untouched wilderness, where towering spruce and pine trees created a canopy so thick that sunlight barely penetrated to the forest floor. The area had long been inhabited by indigenous groups who spoke of ancient spirits dwelling in the deepest parts of the woodland. Though modern visitors typically dismissed such tales as folklore meant to keep outsiders at bay. The crew consisted of 7 members working on a low-budget documentary about remote Russian landscapes. Their lead actress, Vesna Mikhailovna Korolev, was a relatively unknown performer from Moscow who had joined the project hoping to gain exposure in the independent film circuit. She was in her late 20s, ambitious and eager to prove herself capable of demanding outdoor shoots. The director, cinematographer, sound technician, and 3 production assistants rounded out the small team that had been camping in the forest for nearly a week. On the morning of October 12th, they were filming a scene that required Vesna to walk alone down a narrow game trail while delivering a monologue about isolation and nature's indifference to human concerns. The trail wound through particularly dense vegetation, with moss-covered stones and exposed roots making footing treacherous. The crew positioned themselves about 40 meters behind her starting point, giving her space to perform while maintaining visual contact through the gaps in the trees. Vesna began her walk at approximately 10:30 a.m., moving slowly and deliberately as instructed. The cameras rolled for roughly 3 minutes before she rounded a gentle bend in the trail and disappeared from view. This was expected according to the shot list. However, when 5 minutes passed without her returning to the designated endpoint, the director called out to her. No response came back through the forest. The crew waited another 2 minutes, calling repeatedly, before the director decided something was wrong. As they began moving toward the trail, a sound erupted from the forest that made them freeze in place. It started as heavy, rhythmic thuds, like massive footfalls crushing undergrowth with tremendous weight. Then came the sharp crack of branches snapping, not the small twigs that hikers might break, but substantial limbs that sounded like rifle shots echoing through the trees. The sound technician, who had been recording ambient forest noise, later reported that his equipment had picked up something else beneath the crashing sounds, a low, guttural exhalation that did not match any known animal in the region. The crew rushed forward in a tight group, calling Vesna's name with increasing desperation. What they found approximately 60 meters down the trail made their blood run cold. Vesna's backpack lay torn open, its contents scattered across the path. Her water bottle had rolled into a small depression, still leaking. The small handheld mirror she carried for checking her appearance between takes was shattered against a rock. Most disturbing was her jacket, found draped over a low branch as if carefully placed there rather than torn off in a struggle. Then they noticed the tracks. Pressed deep into the soft, damp soil were enormous footprints, barefoot and distinctly humanoid in shape, but far too large to belong to any person. Each print measured roughly 45 centimeters in length, with clear impressions of 5 toes and a broad heel. The depth of the impressions suggested something incredibly heavy had made them. The tracks led from the trail directly into the densest part of the forest, where the undergrowth grew so thick it formed an almost impenetrable wall. As the crew stood frozen in confusion and mounting terror, the production assistant who had wandered slightly ahead of the group suddenly gasped and pointed. Through a gap in the fog that perpetually hung in the lower areas of the forest, he claimed to have seen something massive moving between the trees. He described it as an upright figure, easily 2.5 meters tall, covered in dark hair or fur, carrying what appeared to be a limp, dark bundle pressed against its torso. The figure had been perhaps 70 meters away, moving with surprising speed and fluidity for something so large. Within seconds, it had vanished into the fog as if it had never existed. The crew noticed other disturbing details as their initial shock began to wear off. Several of Vesna's smaller items, her lip balm, a pen, and her folding comb, had been arranged in a neat row on a flat rock beside the trail. Branches near the path had been bent and twisted into strange, arcing shapes, with the damage occurring at heights well over 3 meters above the ground, far beyond what any human could reach without climbing. The air carried an overpowering smell, thick and musky, like wet animal fur mixed with something more pungent and unfamiliar. The director immediately used his satellite phone to contact local authorities. A helicopter search was launched within hours, equipped with thermal imaging equipment. They scoured the forest for 2 full days, covering hundreds of square kilometers. They found nothing. No body, no additional tracks, no signs of struggle deeper in the woods. In the days following Vesna's disappearance, the remaining crew members reported that the forest had changed. The usual background noise of birds and small animals had ceased almost entirely. The silence felt oppressive and deliberate, broken only occasionally by deep, resonant knocking sounds that seemed to come from far within the trees. One crew member described it as if something was communicating, though with what or whom remained terrifyingly unclear. The local authorities classified Vesna Mikhailovna Korolev as missing, presumed dead, though her body was never recovered. The film crew abandoned their project and left the region within a week. None of them have returned to that forest, and several have left the film industry entirely, unable to shake the memory of that morning when something vast and unknown had taken their colleague and vanished without a trace into the endless northern wilderness. In late February 2016, a small trapping operation was running along the frozen banks of a remote river in the Sakha Republic of northeastern Russia, roughly 200 kilometers south of Verkhoyansk. The region was notorious for its brutal winters, where temperatures regularly dropped below -40 degrees Celsius, and daylight lasted only a few hours. The area had been used by trappers for generations, with small cabins dotting the landscape at strategic intervals along trap lines that stretched for dozens of kilometers through the taiga. The trapping team consisted of 3 men: Ruslan Dmitrievich Volkov, a veteran trapper in his 50s who had worked these forests for over 30 years, and 2 younger partners, Matvey Igorovich Sokolov and Pyotr Anatolyevich Lebedev, both in their early 30s. They had established their winter camp in a sturdy log cabin that Ruslan had built himself 2 decades earlier. The structure was solid, designed to withstand the harshest elements, with reinforced doors and shuttered windows that could be secured from inside. On February 24th, the team had been expected to make radio contact with their supply coordinator in the nearest settlement. When 3 days passed without any communication, concern grew among their colleagues. On February 27th, 2 men from a neighboring trapline made the difficult journey through deep snow to check on the team. What they discovered would haunt them for the rest of their lives. The cabin door had been completely torn from its hinges, yet the metal locks remained intact and closed, as if something had simply ripped the entire door away rather than breaking the locking mechanism. The door itself lay 20 meters from the cabin, half buried in snow. The destruction required immense force, far beyond what any known animal in the region could produce. Inside the cabin, the scene was deeply disturbing. The 3 trappers lay scattered across the floor, their bodies rigid from the extreme cold, faces frozen in expressions of absolute terror. What made the discovery even more unsettling was the complete absence of visible wounds. There were no bite marks, no claw gouges, no signs of bleeding or violent trauma. They had simply died, apparently from shock or heart failure brought on by overwhelming fear. The interior of the cabin showed signs of bizarre activity. Firewood that had been stacked against one wall had been rearranged into tight spirals, almost decorative in their precision. Tools had been removed from their usual storage places and lined up along the walls in order of size. Food supplies had been sorted and grouped by type, cans with cans, dried goods with dried goods, as if something had been taking inventory. Outside, the snow told a disturbing story. Enormous barefoot prints, each measuring roughly half a meter in length, circled the cabin repeatedly. The depth of the impression suggested something extraordinarily heavy, and the stride length indicated a creature far taller than any human. The tracks led away from the cabin toward the forest edge, where they vanished among the dense trees, as if the maker had simply evaporated. The surrounding pine trees bore deep vertical gouges, carved into the bark at heights exceeding 4 meters above the ground. The scratches were not random but appeared deliberate, evenly spaced, almost ritualistic. Several trees near the cabin had been stripped of branches on one side, creating strange, asymmetrical silhouettes against the winter sky. A pungent, musky odor permeated everything, so strong that it made the rescuers' eyes water. The smell was unlike anything they had encountered, not quite animal, but not entirely unfamiliar either, as if something ancient and wild had passed through and left its mark. The riverbank showed signs of massive disturbance. The snow had been churned and compressed as if something enormous had moved through the area. Yet there were no drag marks or blood trails extending beyond the immediate clearing. Whatever had visited the cabin had come, done its work, and departed without leaving evidence of struggle or pursuit. Local authorities investigated the deaths but could provide no satisfactory explanation. The official report listed the cause as exposure and possible carbon monoxide poisoning, despite the cabin's chimney being clear and functional. The trappers were buried in their home villages, and the cabin was abandoned. In the months that followed, other trappers reported avoiding that section of the river. They claimed the forest felt different there, oppressive and watchful, as if something massive remained hidden among the trees, observing anyone who dared to approach. Some reported hearing deep knocking sounds echoing through the taiga at night, rhythmic and deliberate, like something communicating across vast distances. The cabin still stands, doorless and empty, a silent monument to 3 men who encountered something that defied explanation in the frozen wilderness of northern Russia. On the morning of September 18, 2013, 2 experienced climbers set out to traverse a narrow ridge trail in the Altai Mountains of southern Siberia, approximately 80 kilometers west of Gorno-Altaysk. The region was renowned for its dramatic mountain scenery, with jagged peaks rising above dense forests of larch and cedar. The area had been inhabited by various indigenous groups for thousands of years, and local folklore spoke of tall, hairy beings that walked upright through the high passes, creatures that were neither human nor animal but something in between. The climbers were Zakhar Petrovich Morozov, a 34-year-old mountaineering instructor from Novosibirsk, and his climbing partner, Ilya Sergeyevich Vasilyev, a 29-year-old geologist who worked for a mining survey company. They had been climbing together for 6 years and had tackled numerous challenging routes throughout the Altai range. This particular trail was rated as moderately difficult, with some technical sections requiring ropes and careful navigation, but nothing beyond their capabilities. They began their ascent at 7 a.m., under clear skies that promised good visibility. However, as they climbed higher, a thick fog began rolling in from the valleys below, reducing visibility to less than 30 meters. Zakhar mentioned that the fog felt unusual, denser than typical mountain mist, and it carried a strange, musty odor that neither of them could identify. The temperature was cool but not uncomfortable, hovering around 8 degrees Celsius. As they navigated a particularly narrow section of the trail, Ilya noticed something disturbing in the soft earth and patches of early snow. Enormous barefoot prints marked their path, each footprint measuring roughly 45 centimeters in length and showing clear toe impressions. The stride length between prints was nearly 2 meters, suggesting something far taller than any human. The prints were fresh, made recently enough that the edges remained crisp and undisturbed. The 2 men paused to examine the tracks, trying to rationalize what could have made them. Zakhar suggested perhaps a bear walking on its hind legs, though he admitted the prints looked nothing like bear tracks. Ilya photographed several of the clearest impressions, noting how deeply they pressed into the ground, indicating tremendous weight. They continued climbing, but the atmosphere had changed. The fog seemed to thicken around them, swirling in patterns that felt almost deliberate. Every sound was muffled, creating an eerie silence broken only by their breathing and the crunch of their boots on stone and earth. At approximately 10:30 a.m., they reached a wider section of the trail where the path curved around a massive granite outcropping. Through a temporary break in the fog, Zakar spotted something on a distant ledge, perhaps 70 meters away across a steep ravine. A massive upright figure stood motionless, easily 2.5 meters tall, covered in dark reddish-brown hair. The creature was holding something in its arms, something that looked like a small animal or perhaps a large bird. The figure's posture was distinctly humanoid, with broad shoulders and long arms that hung past where its knees would be. Zakar immediately grabbed Ilya's arm and pointed. Both men watched as the figure shifted its burden carefully, adjusting its grip with what appeared to be surprising dexterity. Then, without any sudden movement, it turned and walked into the fog, disappearing as silently as if it had never existed. The entire sighting lasted perhaps 15 seconds. As they stood frozen in shock, Ilya noticed other disturbing details along the trail. Branches from the stunted trees that grew at this altitude had been bent into perfect semicircles, twisted with enough force to crack the wood but not break it entirely. Rocks had been stacked into crude geometric formations, small cairns that served no obvious navigational purpose. The arrangements looked deliberate, almost ritualistic. The descent became a test of nerve. Both men felt watched, as if unseen eyes tracked their every movement from somewhere within the fog. The mist seemed to respond to their presence, parting ahead of them and closing behind, creating a corridor that felt more like a channel than natural weather patterns. Zakar later reported feeling a constant pressure between his shoulder blades, the unmistakable sensation of being observed by something intelligent and calculating. Strange sounds followed them down the mountain. Deep, resonant knocks echoed through the fog, wood striking wood with deliberate rhythm. The sounds came from multiple directions, as if something was signaling their position to others. Twice, they heard what sounded like heavy breathing, low and controlled, coming from just beyond the edge of visibility. They reached the trailhead at 4 p.m., exhausted and deeply shaken. Both men were experienced outdoorsmen who had spent years in remote wilderness, but nothing had prepared them for what they had witnessed. Ilya checked his camera and found that while the photographs of the footprints had turned out clearly, the images he had tried to take of the figure on the ledge showed only fog and rock. 3 weeks later, a group of hikers reported finding the same trail markers, the bent branches and stacked rock, exactly as Zakar and Ilya had described them. The formations remained undisturbed, precise, and deliberate. The enormous footprints, however, had vanished, washed away by rain or deliberately obscured. The ridge trail developed a reputation among local climbers. Many reported feeling uneasy along that particular section, as if the mountain itself remembered what had passed through and was warning those who followed. Zakar and Ilya never returned to that trail, and both men became notably reluctant to discuss their experience in detail, as if speaking of it too openly might invite unwanted attention from whatever still watched from the high passes of the Altai Mountains. On the afternoon of June 14, 2018, a commercial drone operator was conducting aerial mapping surveys in the remote forests of the Khabarovsk Krai region in far eastern Russia, approximately 120 kilometers northwest of Komsomolsk-on-Amur. The area was characterized by dense taiga forest, with vast stretches of wilderness interrupted only occasionally by narrow logging roads and abandoned Soviet-era infrastructure. The region had minimal human presence, with the nearest permanent settlement more than 50 kilometers away. The operator, Grigory Vladimirovich Petrov, was a 32-year-old surveyor who had been hired by a forestry management company to create detailed topographical maps of potential logging sites. He had been working in remote locations for nearly 8 years and considered himself comfortable with solitude and the unpredictability of wilderness work. His equipment consisted of a high-end commercial quadcopter drone equipped with a 4K camera and GPS tracking capabilities, along with spare batteries and a ruggedized laptop for processing the captured data. Grigory had established his base camp in a small clearing roughly 300 meters from the main tree line. The weather was ideal for aerial work. With clear skies, minimal wind, and excellent visibility, he launched his drone at approximately 2:15 p.m., programming it to follow a predetermined flight path that would cover roughly 5 square kilometers of forest canopy. The drone climbed to an altitude of 80 meters and began its automated survey run. Grigory monitored the live video feed on his controller's screen, watching the endless expanse of green treetops scroll past. The forest appeared uniform and undisturbed, exactly what he expected to see in such a remote location. At 2:47 p.m., as the drone approached a particularly foggy section near a natural depression in the terrain, the video feed began to flicker. Grigory initially attributed this to interference from the moisture in the air, a common occurrence when flying through fog bank. He adjusted the drone's altitude slightly, bringing it down to 60 meters to get better visual clarity. What appeared on his screen made his breath catch in his throat. Through the swirling fog, the camera captured movement that was distinctly out of place. A massive upright figure was moving through the trees with startling speed, far faster than any human could manage in such dense undergrowth. The figure appeared to be covered in dark brownish-black hair and stood at least 2.5 meters tall, with proportions that were vaguely humanoid but somehow wrong. Too long in the arms, too broad in the shoulders. More disturbing was what the figure carried. Pressed against its torso was a dark bundle, something substantial that the creature held with apparent care. The way it moved suggested intelligence and purpose rather than animal instinct. It navigated through the forest with fluid efficiency, avoiding obstacles and choosing its path with clear intentionality. Grigory watched, transfixed, as the figure suddenly stopped moving. It appeared to turn its head upward, as if aware of the drone's presence. For several seconds, it seemed to stare directly at the camera, though the distance and fog made it impossible to distinguish facial features. The posture conveyed awareness and consideration, as if the creature was assessing the threat level of this mechanical intruder. Then, with disturbing abruptness, the figure turned and disappeared behind a thick cluster of trees. The fog seemed to swallow it whole, and within seconds, there was no trace that anything had been there at all. The video feed showed only trees and mist. Grigory remained frozen, staring at his screen, trying to process what he had just witnessed. His hands trembled slightly as he began manually controlling the drone, bringing it back toward his position. That was when he heard the sounds. Heavy, deliberate thuds were approaching from the forest edge, rhythmic and purposeful. The sound was unmistakable, something massive moving through the undergrowth with weight and intention. Branches cracked and snapped, not the random breakage of wind or small animals, but the systematic destruction of obstacles in a path. Panic overrode Grigory's professional curiosity. He commanded the drone to return to home position immediately and began hastily packing his equipment. As he worked, he noticed the forest edge, barely 30 meters from his clearing. The trees there were swaying despite the lack of wind, as if something large was moving just beyond the visible line. The drone landed with its automated precision, and Grigory grabbed it without performing his usual post-flight check. His hands were shaking badly now, adrenaline flooding his system. The thudding sounds had stopped, replaced by an oppressive silence that felt far more threatening than the noise had been. As he disconnected the drone's battery and reached for the memory card, he became aware of a smell permeating the clearing. It was thick and pungent, a musky odor that was simultaneously organic and alien. The scent was so strong it made his eyes water and his stomach turn. It reminded him vaguely of wet animal fur, but with an undertone of something else, something he could not identify. Grigory pulled the memory card from its slot and slipped it into his jacket pocket. He threw his equipment into his backpack with none of his usual care for organization. His only thought focused on leaving the area as quickly as possible. The forest around him had become unnaturally silent. No birds called, no insects buzzed. Even the usual rustling of small mammals in the underbrush had ceased entirely. He made it back to his vehicle, parked 3 kilometers away on an old logging road in record time. His heart pounded throughout the entire hike, and he could not shake the feeling that something massive and unseen was pacing him just beyond his peripheral vision, observing his retreat with calculating intelligence. That evening, safely back in his motel room in the nearest town, Grigory connected the memory card to his laptop, eager to review the footage and confirm what he had seen. What he discovered sent a chill down his spine. The memory card was completely blank, not corrupted or partially damaged, but entirely erased, as if it had never contained any data at all. Every file, every image, every second of video from the entire day's work had vanished without a trace. Grigory reported the incident to his employer, claiming equipment malfunction had forced him to abandon the survey. He provided no details about what he had witnessed. He never returned to that section of forest and eventually left the aerial surveying profession entirely, taking a desk job in urban planning, where the most dangerous thing he encountered was deadline pressure. He kept the blank memory card in a drawer at home, a reminder of the day something immense and intelligent had not only observed him, but had somehow understood enough about his technology to erase any evidence of its existence. On the early morning of August 22, 2017, a solo kayaker launched his vessel into the slow-moving waters of a remote river in the Krasnoyarsk Krai region of central Siberia, roughly 95 kilometers northeast of Yeniseisk. The river wound through pristine wilderness, flanked by dense forests of birch and pine that had remained largely untouched by human development. The area was known among outdoor enthusiasts for its isolation and natural beauty, though few ventured this far into the backcountry due to the logistical challenges of access. The kayaker was Leonid Arkadyevich Solovyov, a 41-year-old wildlife photographer from Krasnoyarsk, who specialized in documenting remote ecosystems. He had planned a 5-day solo expedition along the river, camping at designated spots and photographing the area's abundant wildlife. Leonid was experienced in wilderness travel, having completed numerous solo trips throughout Siberia over the past 15 years. He carried all necessary safety equipment, including satellite communication devices, and had filed a detailed itinerary with local authorities before departing. The morning was cool and still, with temperatures hovering around 12 degrees Celsius. A thick fog had settled over the river during the night, reducing visibility to roughly 20 meters in any direction. The mist clung to the water's surface, creating an otherworldly atmosphere where sound seemed muffled and distance became impossible to judge accurately. Leonid had experienced similar conditions before and found them peaceful, almost meditative. He began paddling upstream at approximately 6:30 a.m., his rhythmic strokes the only sound breaking the profound silence. The current was gentle, requiring minimal effort to make steady progress. The fog created a bubble of visibility around him, with the riverbanks appearing as dark, indistinct shapes through the white curtain of moisture. At 7:15 a.m., Leonid noticed something unusual. The water ahead of him, which had been mirror-smooth and undisturbed, suddenly showed a series of enormous ripples moving against the current. The disturbance was substantial, as if something very large had either entered or exited the water upstream. The ripples moved toward him with surprising speed, far faster than the gentle current could account for. Leonid stopped paddling and allowed his kayak to drift, watching the water with growing unease. The ripples passed beneath his kayak, rocking it gently, and continued downstream before dissipating. The fog swirled in strange patterns, as if disturbed by movement he could not see. Then, through a temporary thinning in the fog bank, he saw it. Standing motionless on the eastern riverbank, perhaps 40 meters ahead, was a massive upright figure. The creature stood at least 2.5 meters tall, with broad shoulders and long arms that hung past its knees. It was covered in dark, matted hair that appeared wet, as if it had recently emerged from the water. Most disturbing was what it held cradled against its chest, a dark bundle of indeterminate shape that could have been an animal, though Leonid could not identify what species from that distance. The figure stood completely still, and even through the fog, Leonid could sense that it was watching him. The posture conveyed awareness and intelligence, a deliberate observation rather than the curiosity of a wild animal. For several seconds, neither moved. Leonid felt his heart hammering against his ribs, every instinct screaming at him to retreat. yet he remained frozen, unable to look away. The creature shifted slightly, adjusting its grip on whatever it carried. The movement was careful and controlled, showing a level of dexterity that seemed impossible for something so massive. Then, as silently as it had appeared, the figure turned and walked into the forest. It did not crash through the undergrowth or make any of the noise one would expect from something of that size moving through dense vegetation. It simply vanished, absorbed by the trees and fog as if it had never existed. Leonid finally found the ability to move. He dug his paddle into the water and began stroking frantically downstream, away from where the figure had stood. As he passed the section of riverbank where the creature had been, he noticed details that made his blood run cold. The trees along the shore had been bent outward in crude arcs, their trunks twisted with enough force to crack the bark but not break the wood entirely. The bending occurred at heights well above 3 meters, far beyond what any human could reach without climbing equipment. Enormous barefoot prints pressed deep into the muddy bank, each measuring roughly half a meter in length. The tracks led from the water's edge into the forest, following a straight line before stopping abruptly among a cluster of dense pines. Pungent, musky odor hung heavy in the air, so strong that Leonid could taste it at the back of his throat. The smell was unlike anything he had encountered in all his years of wilderness photography, neither purely animal nor entirely unfamiliar, but something that triggered a primal recognition of danger. As he paddled furiously downstream, Leonid became aware of another sound cutting through the fog. Slow, deliberate exhalations echoed faintly from the forest, measured and controlled, as if something massive was breathing with purposeful restraint. The sound seemed to follow him, maintaining a constant distance as he moved down the river. For the next 3 hours, Leonid paddled without pause, his arms burning with exhaustion, but his fear overriding any physical discomfort. He kept glancing over his shoulder, certain that he would see the massive figure following along the riverbank, but the fog revealed nothing except the endless line of trees. The sensation of being observed never left him. It was a pressure between his shoulder blades, a constant awareness of unseen eyes tracking his progress. Whatever he had encountered had not attacked him, had not shown aggression, but had simply watched and assessed, as if testing his reactions and finding him unworthy of further attention. By the time the fog began to lift around mid-morning, Leonid was nearly 10 kilometers downstream from the sighting location. The oppressive feeling of observation gradually faded, replaced by the normal sounds of the forest, bird calls, rustling leaves, and the buzz of insects. Leonid continued downstream to his first planned campsite, but found himself unable to stay. He packed up without even removing his kayak from the water and continued paddling. By evening, he had reached the takeout point 2 days ahead of schedule. He loaded his equipment into his vehicle and drove directly back to Krasnoyarsk without stopping to rest. He never filed an official report about what he had seen, knowing how such claims would be received. His photographs from the trip showed only fog and trees, the memory card containing images that revealed nothing unusual. But Leonid knew what he had witnessed, and the knowledge changed him. He stopped taking solo wilderness trips and eventually left wildlife photography entirely, unable to shake the memory of that massive figure standing on the riverbank, watching him with calculating intelligence, carrying something dark and unknown, before disappearing into the endless Siberian forest as if it had never existed at all. On October 3, 2015, a 6-member research expedition departed from the small settlement of Tura in the Evenk region of central Siberia, heading deep into the northern taiga forest approximately 140 kilometers northwest of the town. The region was among the most remote and least explored wilderness areas in Russia, characterized by dense coniferous forests, numerous rivers and streams, and terrain that remained largely unchanged since the last ice age. The area had been traditionally inhabited by the Evenk people, whose oral history spoke of tall forest spirits that avoided human contact, but occasionally left signs of their presence in the deep woods. The expedition was organized by a wildlife conservation group, studying the impact of climate change on native species populations. The team leader was Dr. Natalia Vasilyevna Romanova, a 43-year-old ecologist from a major university in Moscow, who had conducted field research throughout Siberia for nearly 20 years. Her team included Dr. Boris Konstantinovich Fedorov, a botanist specializing in boreal forest ecosystems, Yevgeny Mikhailovich Kuznetsov and Dmitry Alexandrovich Volkov, both wildlife biologists in their early 30s, and two graduate students, Oksana Ivanovna Petrova and Svetlana Yuryevna Lebedeva, who were collecting data for their doctoral dissertations. The expedition planned to spend 3 weeks in the field, establishing a base camp and conducting systematic surveys of the surrounding area. They carried comprehensive equipment, including GPS devices, satellite phones, research instruments, and sufficient supplies for a month if needed. The team had extensive wilderness experience collectively, and Dr. Romanova had personally led similar expeditions successfully on 7 previous occasions. Regular radio contact was maintained for the first 9 days. The team reported normal progress, good weather conditions, and productive data collection. Their last communication occurred on the evening of October 11th, when Dr. Romanova confirmed their position and indicated everything was proceeding according to plan. She mentioned nothing unusual or concerning. When the scheduled radio check-in on October 14th produced no response, the expedition's support coordinator in Tura attempted contact repeatedly throughout the day. By October 15th, with still no communication received, local authorities were notified and a search and rescue operation was organized. A helicopter search team reached the expedition's reported coordinates on the morning of October 16th. What they discovered defied any reasonable explanation and would remain one of the most puzzling disappearances in the region's history. The camp was located in a small clearing surrounded by dense spruce and larch forest. The site itself was intact, but arranged in ways that made no logical sense. All 4 tents had been collapsed and stacked in tight spirals, folded with geometric precision that would have required considerable time and effort. The tents showed no damage, no tears or signs of violent disturbance, but had simply been taken down and arranged as if for some unknown purpose. Personal backpacks belonging to all 6 team members were lined up in a perfect row along the northern edge of the clearing, positioned with military precision. Each pack was upright, fastened, and apparently undisturbed internally. Supplies had been removed from their storage containers and sorted meticulously by category. Food items were grouped together, cooking equipment stacked separately, scientific instruments arranged in order of size, all displayed as if someone had been conducting an inventory. More disturbing were the tracks surrounding the camp. Enormous barefoot prints pressed deep into the soft forest soil, each measuring approximately 45 centimeters in length with clear toe impressions. The tracks circled the entire clearing multiple times, overlapping in places, suggesting prolonged activity. The depth of the impressions indicated something impossibly heavy, and the stride length pointed to a creature standing well over 2.5 meters tall. The prints led away from the camp toward the tree line, following a direct path into the forest. Search teams followed the trail for nearly 300 meters before the tracks simply vanished, as if whatever made them had either evaporated or taken to the trees. No continuation could be found despite extensive searching in all directions. The surrounding trees showed signs of unusual activity. Deep vertical gouges scarred the bark of numerous spruce trees at heights ranging from 3 to 5 meters above ground level. The scratches appeared deliberate rather than random, evenly spaced and running in parallel lines. Several trees had their lower branches broken and bent into semicircular shapes, twisted with enough force to crack the wood, but not sever it completely. These formations encircled the clearing at regular intervals, creating crude markers whose purpose remained unknown. Equipment left at the camp was completely functional. Satellite phones had full battery charges. GPS devices showed no signs of damage. Research instruments remained operational. There was no indication of technical failure that might have prevented the team from calling for help. Food supplies were sufficient for another 2 weeks, and nothing appeared to have been consumed or disturbed by animals. What made the scene particularly eerie was the complete absence of personal items one would expect people to have on their persons. No wallets, no watches, no jewelry, no pocket knives. These items were not found in the camp or in the backpacks. It was as if the 6 researchers had been lifted bodily from the site, taking with them only what they carried on their bodies. The air throughout the clearing and surrounding forest carried a pungent, musky odor that persisted for days, despite wind and weather changes. Search team members reported the smell was so strong it caused headaches and nausea. The scent was organic but unidentifiable, neither matching known animal species in the region nor resembling anything the experienced searchers had encountered before. Local event guides who participated in the search expressed deep reluctance to remain in the area overnight. They reported a heavy, oppressive silence that seemed unnatural, as if the forest itself had been shocked into stillness. The usual background noise of birds and small mammals was notably absent. The only sounds that broke the quiet were occasional deep knocking noises that echoed from various points in the surrounding forest, rhythmic strikes that suggested wood striking wood with deliberate force. The search operation continued for 3 weeks, covering hundreds of square kilometers. Helicopters equipped with thermal imaging swept the region repeatedly. Ground teams searched along every river and stream. Neighboring event communities were questioned extensively. No trace of the 6 missing researchers was ever found. Officially, Dr. Natalia Vasilyevna Romanova, Dr. Boris Konstantinovich Fedorov, Yevgeny Mikhailovich Kuznetsov, Dmitry Alexandrovich Volkov, Oksana Ivanovna Petrova, and Svetlana Yuryevna Lebedeva remain listed as missing, their fate unknown. The case file remains open, though active searching ceased after the first month. The clearing where they vanished has been avoided by locals ever since. Hunters and trappers who work in the region report feeling watched when they approach the area, and many claim to hear those same deliberate knocking sounds echoing through the trees at night, as if something massive still moves through the forest, communicating across distances in a language humans cannot understand, guarding secrets the vanished expedition discovered too late.